Hey, quick announcement. The channel now has official merch. Head on to crowdmade.com using the link in the description or through the pinned comment. Okay, on with the video. Rome. Nicknamed the Eternal City, it's well known for its museums, from the frescoed paintings of the Vatican to the abandoned ruins of the Roman Forum. But there's one museum I bet you haven't heard of. A museum with a very disturbing collection. Attached to a small church, there's a quiet room that houses ghostly artefacts, with messages from beyond the grave. From dark handprints seared onto wood to phantom markings etched in prayer books. The museum's haunting exhibits are dedicated to the souls of the dead and record their eerie communications with the living. It has to be one of the most disturbing museums around. But why does it exist? What's it for? And how do we know that any of these objects are indeed genuine? Welcome to Strange Christian Art. This episode, The Museum of Lost Souls. The story of how this museum came to be is just as dark as its contents. The Little Museum of Purgatory, as it's known, can be found in the Church of the Sacred Heart of Suffrage. It's a very unusual church, the only one in Rome built in a Gothic style. It looks out of place amongst the Baroque domes and Renaissance arches. The building you see today is not the first church on this site. In fact, the original had burnt down in a fire. It was the evening of the 15th of September 1897 when smoke was seen rising from the church's roof. By that point it was too late. The old rafters and beams were already ablaze. All parishioners and priests could do was look on helplessly as their place of worship was consumed by fire. One of the onlookers, Father Victor Jouet, is said to have seen something very strange within the flames. Looking back at him was the face of a man. He had an anguished expression and looked to be in pain. Surveying the damage the next day, the same face had been burnt onto a wall. A deeply religious man, the priest took this as a sign. This face, he believed, was the soul of a man trapped in purgatory, a middle realm between heaven and hell. As the church began reconstruction, he set out to travel around Europe, looking for more evidence of lost souls. For those unfamiliar with the idea, purgatory is the place for those who are not quite good enough for heaven, but also not quite evil enough for hell. Purgatory is the destiny for the mediocre, for those who fell slightly short of heaven's demanding entry requirements. To escape purgatory, souls have to purge themselves of all remaining sin, often by completing difficult trials, or having loved ones praying on their behalf. In doing so, they'll be allowed to proceed and finally enter heaven. The idea of purgatory is not universally accepted amongst Christians, especially as it's not really mentioned in the Bible. The concept seems to date to the Middle Ages, to a legend about an 11th century abbot called Odilo of Cluny. In one version of the story, he'd been shipwrecked on a mysterious island. There he met a hermit who told him about a chasm where lost souls were able to escape the clutches of hell. When the abbot returned home, he established a festival called All Souls' Day to honour the dead and to offer them prayers. Another writer who wrote a lot about purgatory was the medieval poet Dante Alighieri. In his sequel to Inferno, he envisioned purgatory as a giant mountain in the southern hemisphere. The mountain was made up of layers of terraces, each representing one of the 7 deadly sins. In the poem, Dante meets with souls on their way to heaven and describes the difficult trials they must face in order to proceed. For example, on the first terrace, Pride, souls must carry heavy boulders past statues of saints. Doing so would teach them humility. On Terrace 3, Wrath, souls must walk through a blanket of thick, acrid smoke, symbolising how anger can blind good judgment. On the final terrace, Lust, souls must pass through an intense wall of flame to burn away all remaining sin, finally cleansing them before they enter heaven. It's not quite the horror of Dante's Inferno, but purgatory is not quite a paradise either. In the late Middle Ages, the doctrine of purgatory became very popular. There were even tickets, known as indulgences, where you could buy forgiveness of sin. speeding up the journey of a deceased relative as they made their way up the mountain. But in later centuries, purgatory fell out of favour, especially in branches of Christianity like Protestantism. For Catholics, however, it still remains a core belief. As Father Jouet returned from his travels in Europe, he brought with him items that supposedly proved the existence of purgatory. He had gathered a dozen or so of these objects, each with a unique story. Placing them in a small annex of the newly constructed church, he opened his morbid collection to the public. This item, Exhibit 7C, is a dark handprint that has been seared onto a wooden board. In the upper corner, there's a small cross. The story goes that this is the ghostly hand of one P. Panzini, who on the 1st of November 1731 returned as a spirit to make this ghoulish imprint. It was followed by two more handprints, one staining a piece of parchment and the other on a nun's robe. The ghostly handprints came with a plea: "Pray for my soul and end my suffering in purgatory." Many of the other exhibits are books with phantom markings, such as Exhibit 9, a German prayer book with 5 finger holes burnt in the pages. The book belonged to Giorgio Schitz, who on the 21st of December 1838 saw a set of spectral fingerprints char the paper in front of him. Apparently, it was his brother Giuseppe, who had died a few months prior. He asked his brother for forgiveness, to save his soul that was trapped between heaven and hell. One of my favourites is this object, Exhibit 3. It's a nightcap that belonged to a man called Luigi. He too was visited by a strange apparition. It turned out to be the spectre of his wife, Louisa, whose ghostly apparition created a small hole in the cap. Another disturbing story, but I think there's a more mundane explanation to this one. If you ask me, this looks more like the work of moths, who are known to chew through clothing, making these rather distinctive round holes. Just a theory. The room is full of unique exhibits like these: a book that has 3 ghostly finger marks at the base, stained clothing of unknown origin, and even a haunted banknote. Each one has a legend to go with it, all following a rather similar format: vision of a deceased relative, strange mark appears, and a request for a prayer on their behalf. As a collection, this small museum attempts to prove the existence of purgatory, showcasing the ways in which lost souls have attempted to communicate with the living. Since Father Jouet's death in 1912, nothing new has been added. Unfortunately, that charred face that inspired the museum is nowhere to be seen. As with any strange supernatural phenomenon, there's always a question of whether any of these items are really genuine. Whether or not you believe in an afterlife is up to you, but could these objects be fakes? For example, let's look at that handprint again. It doesn't look very natural. The proportions are a bit off. What's more, handprints are not completely flat like this, and instead are made up of contours and ridges. It's likely that this handprint was simply drawn on, perhaps using a hot iron. After all, you can even see a faint outline etched into the wood. I remain skeptical about some of these exhibits, but there are others that are a little harder to explain, like the prayer book with those finger holes. How do you create those marks without burning the rest of the paper? And indeed, some of the other handprints, like this one, seem to look a bit more natural. I'm sure there are plenty of rational explanations here, but when it's hard to figure out, paranormal activity is always a tempting option. Despite these exhibits claiming to prove the existence of purgatory, the Catholic Church takes a dim view to these kinds of objects, especially as they are so easy to forge. Of course, there are plenty of strange relics out there, but usually they're connected to some sort of saint, often their physical remains. These items, however, are not technically holy relics, as they are traces of ordinary people, despite the supernatural stories about their origin. For now, little is known about them. I suspect it will always be that way. The Museum of Lost Souls is not for the faint of heart. Where most museums showcase things from this world, our museum is focused on what comes after. Real or not, these gruesome exhibits still have an eerie feel to them. There's something unsettling about the idea of the dead reaching back out into the world of the living. If you're ever visiting Rome, I would recommend giving this site a visit. Just look out for the out-of-place church along the Tiber River. This little museum, with its ominous handprints and books with scars, is a mystery and a disturbing glimpse of what might await us in the afterlife. Hey, thanks for watching. I had a great time making this, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. If you like this video and want to see more, why not subscribe? A like and a comment also go a really long way. Oh, and do check out the channel's merch over at Crowdmade. We have beanies, t-shirts and hoodies. Links are in the description down below. Anyway, I look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.